Welcome! Today we're going to talk about the Tudor Pelagos FXD. In this review, I'm going to cover the watch itself, I'm going to compare it to the military issued version, and then also compare it to some vintage Tudor MNs. Spoiler alert, I'm a fan of this watch. I think Tudor really nailed the execution of everything on this. The color is fantastic. The fixed lugs really speak to the tool watch nature of this piece. The bright white hands and the hour markers really contrast well against the really beautiful blue on this watch. The titanium satin finished case is fantastic with bevels, a bidirectional bezel, along with a fully graduated reverse countdown scale. Direct sunlight really activates the lume, as you can see here. The entire bezel is illuminated along with the hour markers and the hands. The pointed crown guards are really beautiful. The FXD omits the helium escape valve of the standard Pelagos, which makes for a thinner case. A lot of people, including myself, were hoping that this release would have been more of the size of the Black Bay 58. While larger, I think it wears really well, and I actually appreciate the increased diameter. I highly recommend you listen to this Hodinkee Radio episode where James Stacy interviewed Ross Povey, otherwise known as Tudor Collector on Instagram. Ross makes the case that the FXD's case size is actually correct for those wanting a civilian equivalent of a military-issued watch, because this is exactly the same watch as what the MN issued to their Commando Hubert. To offset the slightly larger case size against my 6 1/4 inch wrist, I like to wear this on a purlon strap, such as this one from Crown and Buckle, which clocks in at 56 millimeters on the wrist. Here's the fixed strap bars machined from a single block. On the case back is the Marine Nationale logo, along with MN21, standing for Marine Nationale, or French Navy, and 21 representing 2021, or the year of manufacture for this watch. On the military version, 21 would stand for the year of issue. Similar to the arrangement on an MN82, the MN engraving is on a single line, as compared to the stacked configuration on an MN77. Taking a closer look at the fixed bars, Tudor did a great job chamfering the edges so as not to wear down the straps. The FXD includes a 22mm fabric strap with a branded buckle that's a really nice quality. It's a single pass design with a hook and loop fastener to secure the strap. The end is stitched, which is a nice touch. Mounting the watch on the strap reveals a couple of issues, at least for my 6 1/4 inch wrist. First, the fuzzy material passes through one end of the lugs, which isn't the cleanest look, and second, there's an excess amount of the strap sticking out. It also threw off the positioning of the buckle. I appreciate that the extra long strap allows for wearing this over a wetsuit, but since I don't dive, I needed to shorten the strap. Fortunately for me, Mom was in town and was up to the task. Thanks, Mom. I borrowed an FXD strap from another owner to show you the end result. To shorten the strap, we started on the buckle end so as to preserve the stitching on the open end of the strap. The job called for removing the stitching on the buckle end, cutting the required amount, then restitching it. As I mentioned, you'll definitely want to use the buckle end so you don't mess up the stitching on the loose end. We also removed and shortened the fuzzy portion of the strap so that it didn't interfere with the lug. Now you can see there's a nice gap. We left the hook section of the strap alone, and we got a perfect result with the strap fitting nicely with no material between the lugs. While I might not be able to get this on a wetsuit, there's still plenty of room for everyday adjustment. And on the wrist, it comes in at about 1.3 millimeters wider than on the Perlon strap. Shortening the strap also had the benefit of centering the buckle. The FXD also includes a blue rubber strap. It's 22 millimeters wide and has a fabric-like imprint. It's a bright blue, brighter than the face of the watch, and here it is on the wrist. On the wrist, it comes in at 4 millimeters wider than on the Perlon strap. Because it's thicker than the fabric strap, the ends flare out and it's slightly bulkier on the wrist. Now we'll compare the FXD to the version issued to the Marine Nationale. Shout out to Flex New on Instagram, who was lucky enough to acquire one of the issued watches and shared these photos. As far as the watch itself goes, the differences between the civilian version are only cosmetic. The dial on the issued version simply says Pelagos and 200 meters as opposed to the 4 lines of text on the civilian version. This photo also gives us a sense of the deeper navy blue on the Pelagos FXD versus the earlier blue Pelagos. While the watch head itself had only cosmetic differences, the issued watch came with several unique straps. Special thanks to this anonymous Instagram user who let me use these photos. These photos showed that the issued strap came with a double D-ring system as opposed to a single buckle. The FXD issued to the Commando Hubert also came with this black strap, which was useful for connecting the FXD to a dive board. It appears to have a version of the D-links, as well as a hook and loop fastener and a clip. The second cosmetic difference on the issued version is that the case back is simple, with just MN21 and a larger font size than on the civilian version. Of course, it also lacks the Marine Nationale logo. Now I'll take a closer comparison of the FXD to the vintage Tudor MNs that we all know and love. If you haven't already, this might be a good time to check out my book on Marine Nationale watches. In my book, I go in depth into 34 issued timepieces, Longines, Doxa, Tudor, Casio, Tag Heuer, and many other brands that were used by the French Navy, along with detailed provenance for each watch. If you're a fan of this channel, I'm pretty sure you're going to like this book. The quintessential design of a Tudor MN sub is this blue snowflake from 1977. This example was issued to the diving school of the Marine Nationale and is engraved on the back with MN77, 77 representing the year of issue. While the materials, size, and color are different, the design language is the same between these two instruments, with the key visual difference being the fully graduated bezel on the FXD. Side by side, you can see that the blue on the FXD is brighter than the blue on the MN77. The MN77 is a reference 94010 and has a 38mm case size. The vintage Submariner comes in at 47.3mm, which is about 4mm shorter than the FXD's lug-to-lug length. On a Perlon strap, it comes in at 48.2 on the wrist compared to 56 for the FXD. So it is 8mm larger on the wrist, but I think it wears just fine, especially when you take into account that a vintage sub on a NATO strap like this Phoenix one comes in at 55mm on the wrist. The point I'm making is that we should take into account how the watch wears on a wrist on a strap as opposed to just focusing on the case dimensions, because otherwise you might miss out on a watch that's pretty fantastic like the FXD. Here's a shot of the FXD's pointed crown guards against the turned down guards of the vintage sub. You can also see the crowns with the vintage sub using a Rolex crown, which was typical of the period. Vintage subs also typically had a domed plexiglass, which adds to the case thickness, 13.5 in this case, compared to the FXD, which has a flat mineral glass, which is of course more modern, though I think it would look pretty cool on a domed plexi. It comes in at 12.6 millimeters, so it's actually thinner than the vintage sub. The bezel has a great feel to it, and it has an overhang just like on the vintage subs. The lip of the bezel extends over the case, making it easier to rotate. The vintage sub has a bidirectional bezel, just like the modern FXD. The FXD also has a more pronounced bezel than on earlier Pelagos models. At the bezel, the vintage sub is only 3 mm shorter than the FXD. The color of the FXD is a little bit hard to appreciate through photos, so I thought we'd compare it with Tudor subs that you might be more familiar with. It's a little bit brighter than the blue of the vintage Tudor MN77. And actually, I find that the blue is quite close to the later MN issued model 94010 that has a glossy dagger and dot configuration. This blue is very close to the blue of the FXD dial. This particular watch is an MN82 issued to the submarine base in Lorient. For completeness, here's a 20 mm strap on the FXD. It looks great, and the shorter width exposes the fixed bars on the FXD. To close things out, I mounted the FXD on these straps from NDC Straps. They're made from parachute webbing material and are known as MN straps because MN divers would use this material to mount their watches. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Have a great day.